They say we should have known better than to fall so deep down into this rabbit hole we found. And I was thinking.
Hi, this is Nikolai, and you're listening to My Dad Rafal, co-host James Jardian, and featuring Mr. Jim Tiller on the one and only Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Plug in, listen up, and enjoy.
Deep into this pool of regrettable situations. Pitch black, think back to the last time that we were happy.
Okie dokie. Well, that was fun. I always want to makes me want to dance. I feel like this should be a requirement. Remember that old SNL sketch Sprockets? And now it's that time on Sprockets when we dance. No? Nobody? Okay. I know at least like 3 of you out there got that joke. Also Hans and Franz, who are here to pump you up. Anyway, welcome Down the Security Rabbit Hole, guys, to another edition of the Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast, the industry's favorite. And one of the longest running, not the longest running, one of the longest running, because there's a couple out there that Steve Gibson's probably still podcasting out there somewhere. I got to go back to listening to that. Hi, Steve. Anyway, this week, bringing you episode 643, I think, unless I renumber this for later effect. But I've got the crew. I've got below me, Mr. Jim, over there yonder. That's James. And the guy to that way. He's right there. Woo, there he is. That's my friend Merlin. We were just chatting about the lovely weather in his part of the world, where it is warmer. As you guys can tell, I think Merlin and James are the only ones in their natural habitat. Jim and I are elsewhere. I'm traveling because I'm in a hotel room. But as we record this, we're going to talk about the CISO's first 90 days. Merlin just dropped into a new gig. I think on day 2, Merlin, I tagged you and asked how you were doing, and you're like, "Hey, get back to me in like a month." So I figured let's give it some time. Let's and we'll talk about it. But first, do introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you very much, Merlin Namuth. I am Chief Information Security Officer for the City and County of Denver. So Denver is kind of unique that way. We are one of, I believe, 18 municipalities that were both a city and county combined. And so I have. I
can't see that.
Yeah. So my sister role, I get to do both city and county government activities.
So I've had some county CISOs in the past. We've had Doug on. He's from Snohomish County up in Washington. It's a massive county. You guys deal with some crazy stuff, man. Tell me, give me the breadth of your responsibility as it pertains to security across, I guess, both jobs.
Yeah, well, it's all combined in one job, but
okay.
Yeah, we have somewhere in the neighborhood of 55 agencies and departments and independent agencies that we're responsible for. So it's a very big, complex role. When you think of like private sector, and I've mostly spent most of my career in private sector. I mean, that's like 55 business units. It's like, who has that?
Yikes! Did any of them have to actually listen to you?
Most of them do. There actually is. I believe. I know it wasn't the current mayor. It might have been. I think the previous mayor had signed an executive order where the agencies have to use technology services. So I report to the CIO, and they have to use technology services for their technology and for security. So it's nice to have that enforcement from the top to be able to enforce that, rather than people using their P card and going to Best Buy and buying whatever they want.
That never happens.
I've lived that.
Yeah, allegedly. Yeah.
I know nothing. Let me start you off with this then. Give me your thoughts on, and the listeners, your thoughts on, you walk into a new role, right? You're the CISO of an organization. You just inherited. What's the, I guess, first things you think of? What's the first things you do? Walk us through that, the initial plunge into the water.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been a CISO a few times. I don't know, I think this is like my 6th or 7th security program I've actually run. I think 4th one with the actual CISO title, which actually does make a difference. I've been a director of security, leading security practices, and then CISO, and it really does make a difference having the CISO title. It gives me more access to executives in the company and to the board. In my current role, at the city council, I've actually met with city council members already in my role. I'm like 4.5 months into my job. So yeah, so the first, it's really listening a lot. I'm not the first person to have this seat with the city and county of Denver, and so I wanted to understand what my predecessors did, why decisions were made. Because if you come in initially, be like, well, that's really strange. Why would someone do that? Well, there's an explanation behind it. It may be a good explanation, it may be a bad explanation, but there is an explanation behind that. And so, I really just observe a lot, ask a lot of questions, build relationships. It's just so important to build relationships so people, know who I am and that I can earn their trust, and that they will come to me and ask me, for advice, or if they notice something that is a little bit wonky, that they'll reach out and say, is this a security, reach out and see if it's a security incident that we need to be concerned about.
Okay. Where on the priority list, like when you said you listen, right? So there's different ways of approaching your first 90 days, your first whatever. You've got to understand the group you're inheriting, where they were going, do an assessment of kind of what's happening, and then figure out whether that's compatible with the way you think and how you want it to go. Talk me through that process.
Yeah. So again, I don't want to, come into a role, because I've seen like other CISOs, and not even just CISOs, but it could be like, technology leaders come into a role and they come in like, bull in the china shop and gonna make all these changes right away. And it's like, that's just, it's too soon. You just don't know what's all going on. Now, if there's some things that are like really going off the rails really bad, and then of course that's needed, but most of the time that's not the case. And so for me, is really building those relationships, understanding where things are currently at, where things are heading. And I've actually, in just a few months, I've made some course corrections, and have outlined some different priorities for the team, from both a strategic and a tactical perspective on things that we should be focusing on.
I'm curious because there's so many different things that you can begin to focus on, right? So my reaction is there any, I think you kind of leaned into that a little bit by saying, is there any current activity? Like maybe is there, you're dealing with an incident or whatever. So how do you, of all the different things, compliance, ability to respond, partners, third party, whatever, out of all the stuff that's already going on, and of course you want to create all these relationships, how do you decide how you're going to prioritize you building knowledge about that environment? Do you focus first on what is our current activities? What's our current defensive posture? What's our current compliance? Can I see the last risk assessment or report? Or is it all the above?
It's all the above. And in addition is, what's important to my boss. Because I report to the CIO, and she's been there for about a year and a half. And so of course she has her list of priorities and things that she wants to see done. And then also, her priorities are also the mayor's priorities. And so I need to understand that and make sure that my team is aligned to that and supporting that. Because, part of my job is, to help my boss look good in her job. And so I need to support her and make sure I'm aligned to the things that she's getting asked to do.
How do you balance the expectation on how quickly things start happening, right? Because when you first come in, obviously, as you stated, you have to sit there and you have to be able to adjust and understand before you just start, wide swath, cut this, do that. how do you sit there and balance that with the expectation? Say, hey, I need 90 days before we're going to really start seeing some of the things I think we should implement start taking pace.
Yeah. Again, that's just like talking to people, because, if I'm going to make like guesses, it's like I'm going to guess wrong because I just don't know enough information. And so, I ask a lot of questions, and yeah, now, like for example, and I'm just going to give a general examples, and nothing that I'm currently working on. But if I come in and find out that the organization had failed a HIPAA assessment, for example, it's like, well, that's going to be a pretty big priority if you're a healthcare organization, and need to figure out, okay, where is it currently at to remediate the shortcomings, so that way the next assessment will be successful. And then also, coming in, I've been in security for over 26 years. And so, of course, I'm really concerned about our defensive posture as well as our detection. So those are some of the first things I'm looking at. It's like, what do we have in place for endpoint protection? What do we have in place for monitoring? Do we have a SIM? Do we have a, MSSP? Those kind of things. So that way I can understand where we're currently at. One thing that I've seen, and I think it's a mistake, is that people will come in and be like, oh, well, this organization has Sentinel-1. I don't like Sentinel-1. I prefer CrowdStrike. And they just like rip it out like right away. And I'm like, okay, I have my preferences as well, but is there nothing else to do in the security program? And so there's time and money to like spend on, replacing the EDR with something that you prefer? Or do you have gaps that where you have absolutely no tooling or processes in place to be able to address that? And it's like, okay, well, then we're going to leave Sentinel-1 and we're going to address those gaps first, and then come back and revisit. And yeah, maybe Sentinel-1 isn't my preferred tool, but is it doing what it needs to do? And if it's doing what it needs to do, then I'm going to leave it alone, because it just doesn't make any sense.
It'd be interesting to know how many times a new CISO comes in and that exact thing happens. Right. And maybe this is why the lifetime of a CISO is only 3 years, because it takes you 3 years to come in and rip out everything that existed to put your preferences in for the next guy to come in and do the same thing.
1000%. I was just going to say that I think, not to be too much, but I think if you have a little bit of gray in your beard, you know not to do that, because I'm giggling because so many scenarios you see that. Nope, I'm ripping everything out. I'm going to change it. This is better. I'm used to it. That kind of thing. And I think in some cases, because you're the new CISO, because there's a lot of support behind the role, especially when there's a change like that. There's a huge runway kind of thing. I did want to I don't want to derail too far, but just give me the 30-second on this, because I'm really curious. You're coming in, we're focusing obviously on security. You're a CISO, right? But also you're a leader, right? So you have a new teams, and very spread out. Real quickly, because I want to stay in the security lane, but I just want to briefly understand, how much time did you spend in the sort of the HR team evaluation space, and maybe even with the budgeting space? For example, did you have to look across your team and saying, where's everything stand? Where did my predecessor leave it? Like, promotions that were in process, or performance issues that may have been in process. Did you spend a lot of time with that, or is that something you saw as more organic and you would draw your own conclusions?
Oh, no, I definitely did that. So I think I was in my role for, I want to say 2 months. And then I started having one-on-ones with everybody, all the individual contributors, because I didn't want to have those too soon, because they wouldn't be as valuable discussions, because I just didn't know enough about the environment and things that were going on. And so I waited for a couple months to start doing that, and then got all sorts of insights and that added to my learning about the environment. Kind of going back to what you said about the, you also see in CISOs do that, just like rip out for their preferred tools. I've also seen that like doing that with people as well. That they'll come in and be like, oh, well, I've had, John working for me for, a number of years, and I'm going to bring him in because, he does a great job. Well, you don't know if your current staff, how they're performing. And it's like, why why create all this chaos and change if it's not needed? Now, I think also another thing, like, you're saying, like, coming as a new CISO, you have runway. I definitely agree with that. I think you have to choose what that runway is. And I think that, people are like, oh, I got to come in and like make all these changes. And then that way, people are going to like me and value me and appreciate me, and I'm going to be successful in my role. And it's like, the thing is, like, with security, it's like you can come in and lead the most mature security program. There's always things to do that are innovative and strategic, because everything's always changing with security. Now we have AI. It's like, what company has like a really mature, process and evaluation and everything around AI? Probably not much. And so there's always opportunity to, make a name for yourself as the new CISO.
Is that a comfort thing? Because we were sitting here actually chatting about this behind the scenes, right? But the idea of just coming in and swapping out an EDR, like, it's something you're familiar with. It shows that you're doing something. Mm-hmm. It's a comfortable action that you can come in as a new person. Not saying it's a valuable action, but it's a comfort action. And I know, people are creatures of comfort, right? I'm going to come in and I'm going to do something that I understand. And then we're going to hit the point where I'm past that point. And, the good people are going to stick around and do more. The other ones are going to take off and say, okay, where can I go next to do this same thing to help implement, right? Because it's kind of that chasing the squirrel of, let me show you something, even though it may not actually be improving that program at all. But it's a comfort level thing, I would think, for some people to drop into.
Definitely. And, prior to this role, most of the security programs I ran were very new, or I had to come in with dynamite and blow it all up and rebuild it from scratch because it was so bad. And so I've been in that situation so many times. It's like, I don't need to install another SIM. I don't need to install another EDR. I don't need to install another vulnerability management system. I've done that so many times in my career. And so it's actually refreshing coming to the city and county of a well-established security program. Now, of course, I have a lot of things I'm working on, but I don't have to do some of those more fundamental things. Those things are in place and they're functioning well. And so I get to like actually think about like, well, how would I approach this? I haven't done this before. So I'm actually able to do some innovative things that I've never done before. And, and I reach out to my network and ask people if they've done things like this before. And one person that I'd reached out to, he's like, yeah, so we're looking at a particular tool for that uses AI for incident response. And he's like, yeah, I've heard of the tool. He's like, let me know what you find out after you, I'm probably going to end up purchasing it. And he's like, yeah, let me know how that works out for you. So it's cool to be on that side of doing things that are more cutting edge rather than installing yet another vulnerability management tool.
I want to ask you, because, and this, again, I think we're taking a couple sidebars here, but that's okay. You mentioned, talking to some of your peers in the industry when it comes to opinions on vendors and things to follow, things to do. Because I know a bunch of folks that are in the sales world listen to this show, and I think it's worth pointing out the power and importance of having a good reputation among peers of the people you're trying to sell to. Can you underline that a little bit, Merlin?
Yeah, I think that goes on both sides. So I think both as a CISO and as a salesperson, that you need to have a good reputation. One of the things that I tell every security team that I've led, that of course we want our vendors to be partners with us, but I said we also need to be a good partner back to them. And so like if the tool breaks, we need to be fair about that, because things, technology is not 100%, and so things are going to fail. And so we need to work with the vendor. Now, of course, if the vendor's not willing to work with us or there's issues, then that's a whole different story. And what I tell my team is, do you guys remember like Looney Tunes, and there's Marvin the Martian character? Do you remember him?
Yep.
So my team, when they're like, yeah, I'm kind of having some challenges with this vendor, I'm like, does Marvin need to come to a meeting? And they're like, well, not yet, but maybe. And so if you remember, like from the cartoon Marvin the Martian, he'd be like, I'm getting angry, very angry indeed. And so that's my angry inner self, and that's I refer to
I
him
like
as
it.
Marvin. So sometimes
I like
that
it.
has to come out, when vendors aren't doing what they've agreed to do. Rarely does that come out because, again, it's about building relationships. So not only do I need to build relationships internally with the 55 different agencies and departments, but also with my vendors. And I have, there's like some people, some vendor salespeople. I'm kind of like thinking about this, that I have literally been doing business with for over 20 years. Because they know how to partner. They're not going to come in and be like, hey, Merlin, I'm now working for this company, and I think this would be a great solution for your environment. They might say, hey, I'm working for this vendor, can I come in and tell you, what this solution does? And usually I'm pretty willing because I have that relationship with them already. But they're not going to just force it on me. They're not going to be like, here's our tool, let's help you go find a problem that the tool is going to solve. That it's, approaching it the other way around of like, Merlin, what's your initiatives? And some of those, like I've had like a few different resellers that I've had some really strong relationships with some of their sales folks, where when I've like changed jobs and then led a security program somewhere else, I bring them along with me. We get an MSA in place and all that, and then I sit down with them and I show them my security strategy of like, here's what my initiatives are for the next year, 3 years, 5 years, and so. That, to me, that's partnership, because they're not here to like just force a bunch of tools on me. Now, of course, they're going to try to sell me things, but it's they know what they need to do to align to what my strategy is. So again, they're not trying to force things on me like, hey, here's a really cool AI tool that I think you really need. And it's like, well, that doesn't address anything that I'm working on right now. But they're more aligned and partnered with me.
How do you mentioned earlier when we were talking about kind of the bringing on the tooling because of comfortability and also the people, a lot of times people travel with their people. How do you go about, I don't know if reassure is the right way here, but like reassuring the existing people in the current organization, like, hey, I'm not going to just fill in with all my own people and bring in my own team. Because I've definitely been in organizations before, right? New CISO comes in and it's like, okay, there's a new VP of this, there's a new, all these higher level positions that oftentimes people in-house are kind of waiting for, or, they're on that path for that. And all of a sudden it's like, oh man, like I was in a good position with my old CISO. Now I got this new one and I'm probably on the way out, and I think that kind of is that feeling a lot of people have, like, hey, the CISO leaves and there's a good chance, my role's gone too, just from de facto, because they're going to bring in, people they've worked in the past.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've been in that situation as well. As you're talking, I have never actually done that before. Now, I have brought people in who have worked for me before, but it's because I had an open rec. And so I have them come in, but then also I would tell the other team, be like, I understand, this person worked for me. Don't feel like you need to be pressured into saying, yes, hire this person. So they still have to go through the interview process, because, the individual contributors have to work with this person, whether it's another individual contributor or if it's a leader that I bring in. So it's really only that way. And then, and after a period of time, if someone's not working out, well, then it's going to go through the whole HR process, and then it'll create an opening. So I'm not going to create an opening just to bring in my buddy. But if I have an opening, then of course I want to bring in people who've worked for me before, who've proven themselves, and then people I trust because I know what they're capable of doing.
Which I think is the valid side of the other side of the coin, right? I mean, the people at the company are looking at like, oh man, somebody's going to come in, that we don't know because them. But on the opposite side of that, I mean, being the new CISO, being in charge, you want people that you trust. And sometimes that is the best way to find people, that you can count on to get stuff done. I mean, we've all been in situations where you got people that, they just don't do anything, right? Like if I've got somebody that's actually proven over the course, it's great to be able to pull those people in.
Exactly.
And know that you already work well together, and you'll be able to get things actually accomplished.
Yeah, I've actually had someone who's worked for me 3 different times, 3 different companies. But in each of those cases, well, except for the first, because he was already at the company when I went to work there. And I had openings, and so it just worked out that he was able to come because he was looking as well.
Hey, Merlin, let me ask: is there when you're looking to change roles, change your scenery, so to speak, are you in particular, or maybe you don't have to answer, maybe you in particular, but do you know that if people in your role tend to look at like, hey, you've been working in government, let's stay in that, or you've been in hospitality, I'm going to stay in next, that's what I know, and or are you trying to, or do you find it relatively easy to go across markets?
I have I've worked in so many different markets, so I mean it's
I
worked
figure you'd
out
be
for
the
me.
right person to ask this, right?
Yeah, yeah, because I've been in retail, oil and gas. I've been government a couple times, been defense, financial services a couple times. I think that pretty much covers most of the industries I've been in. Yeah, I mean, some companies are like, oh, well, you don't have enough oil and gas experience, so I want to bring in someone who's more current or whatever. And I don't know if that's really that necessary. It's like, in the CISO role, it's like, yeah, security is different. The goals are different in different companies. Like, if I go to work for like a, electrical generation company, it's like, they're all about availability and, not as much about privacy. So, but just understanding that, I don't know, I just, because I have worked across different industries, I think I've kind of figured out how to ask the right questions when I start and make sure that I understand how the business and organization works and can adapt to that.
I'm going to ask you the question. I think you're going to love or hate to answer depending on who you are. But as I know, a couple of you guys that move around to various across markets, do you have a favorite security framework that you walk in on day one and go, all right, I'm going to evaluate this place based on this CSF or based on CIS, whatever? Like, do you have a favorite that's maybe not industry specific, but something that you use as a frame of reference to see, like, okay, where are we deficient? Where are we built? Where are we overbuilt? Where are we underbuilt?
It depends on the organization, which one I'm going to use. Yeah.
It's not that easy, Raph.
What are you, a lawyer?
I've used all three of those at different organizations, and like I used SIS-18 for at a company that was one where I had to go in and detonate the security program, rebuild it from scratch, and because there wasn't much in place for technical security control. So SIS-18 is really more structured for that, and so that just made a lot more sense now. Like in which I could share about being in city and county, a more established security program. I'm doing this CSF because we have a good foundation of things in place. We have some good policies, and so I really want to see where we stand with that. And I've worked for companies that had international presence, and ISO just made a lot more sense for them. So it just really depends on the organization.
Let me take it from a different perspective. Do you focus on the same problems? Like, have you consistently seen across all these industries, they all suffer in this way? So instead of creating something new, do you focus on the same, well, I know they're gonna have this problem, let me see if they have it. Do you focus on it from an experience framework as opposed to a traditional framework?
Yeah, most definitely, because when I start, it's like, there's things that go around my mind that I want to make sure we have in place. Like, do we have email security in place? What do we have for identity in place? MFA, EDR, monitoring. So, there's definitely my personal framework, I guess, of making sure that those foundational things are in place. And I refer to those as foundational because years ago I was having lunch with a local peer, and we were talking about, like, man, why can't we get patching right? Why can't we get vulnerability management right as an industry? And it's like, why can't we get the basics right? And in that lunch, he and I both came to the conclusion, it's like, well, first of all, we need to stop referring to it as basic, because I think basic sends the wrong message that they're easy to do. And I mean, asset management is really difficult. I've worked in companies that are like just a few hundred employees to, tens of thousands of employees, and it doesn't matter what size organization you are, asset management is really, really difficult to get right.
Yeah, it's brutal.
All right. Well, we're coming up on time. This may not be a 2-minute question, and that's okay if it's not. I'll let you go as long as you need to. I want to know, where's your head at when you talk about how do you measure the organization in terms of maturity, in terms of operational capacity, in terms of capability? What do you measure on day one? Like, what kind of metrics are you trying to get versus at the end of year one? There's got to be, I'm not saying there's the same things from every organization, but the patterns, I think, repeat. Agree? Disagree?
Definitely. And that's where it kind of goes into my, when I come to an organization, understand why things are in place, what's in place. So using my personal experience framework, as Jim referred to, which I like that. And, if some of those things, if some of those foundational things aren't in place, there's no metrics. And so,
yeah.
I'm going after, making sure that I have good technical controls in place and detection in place, because as I've told people, the attackers don't care about your policies. So, it's like, let's focus on detection and prevention first, and then we can get policies in place, we can get metrics in place, we can make, do a gap assessment on where we align, to whatever compliance standard that the organization has to adhere to, and then just keep building from there.
You guys got anything else you want to ask him? I've got more, but I think we're going to run out of time here.
Yeah, I can do this all night.
This is fun.
All right. Well, maybe we'll just let you go there, because this is one that I think we can follow up on. You hit the 6-month mark. Maybe we come back and or maybe 9-month mark or something like that, and you come back and like, all right, here's what I learned. Here's some things that we can throw. James, you got one more?
Yeah, I got one more. I was thinking about this as we're going. How do you come in from your security team perspective? How do you analyze that to see, like, do you have the right size team, the right skills on the team, all that stuff? Because that's a big lift walking into any, everybody always says, we don't have enough people, but it's all based on, what type of work you're doing and all that. Like, how do you assess the team that you have to see, like, hey, do we have the right roles and stuff for that?
Yeah, so that was really, I've done that already in my role. So that was when I started having the individual skip level meetings with individual contributors. So I can understand more what their day-to-day looks like, what their role is. And then after I had all those meetings, then I could step back and really take a look of like, where do our skills and experience align with the team. And then it also depends on what we have in place for tooling as well, because, thank goodness, security has really matured a lot since my early days of, that basically we have firewall, free snort, and antivirus, and that was basically our security program.
What are you kidding me? Some places still operate off of that.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
I know, exactly. It's sad but true. And so I take a look at the people and also the tools and see what gaps we may have, and where we can continue to grow. I'm always looking at like automation, because to your point, no one ever has enough people on the security team. Security is a great field. It takes a lot of experience and knowledge, and so our salaries are higher than those in traditional IT and that. So our teams are always going to be smaller, because it does cost quite a bit to staff up our teams appropriately. So so I'm looking at a combination of that, and I've really been focused a lot on automation for the past few years, because I've never had like a team where I'm like, oh, I feel like we have the right number of people.
Yeah.
That's never the case.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And that's the point, right? You never come in and think, oh man, I've got plenty of people. This is fantastic. But it also leads with the new stuff coming out, like a focus on automation, a focus on different things. Sometimes that actually leads to, hey, we need different skill sets based on that. If I'm doing a ton of automation, I don't need a security person. I could use a developer for that.
Yep. Yeah, and to that point, I actually have a developer on my team that works on creating automations.
Yeah.
And there's some pretty cool automations that the team had put in place that I'm very impressed with. So, and this is like I think this is like the second time in my career where I've been on a security team where we had a developer, and oh my gosh, it's so helpful. Also, another skill set that's really helpful. It's a little bit harder sell sometimes, but is to have a tech writer. Because that person can help you write just outstanding policies and really help you stay on top of that, as well as the communication that we should be doing, across the organization, is really helpful. To be able to lean on them because, let's face it, our security guys aren't necessarily the best communicators, and so to have someone who specializes in that really, really helps.
So I have to ask one more question, if I may. And I think one of the things for me, I was wanting to ask really kind of at the beginning, and I derailed a little bit. So one of the things that we certainly learned on this show about, talking to people around municipalities, for example, is you have the double duty of a city and a municipality. And you said like 55 different agencies, but I think we have to remember there's health agencies, there's transportation, we're not talking like just, it's like working for a company that makes 17 different widgets but they all can be, hang in a car. You're literally running security for 55 arguably different industries, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I was really curious what was that like for you in the first 90 days, and how much will that affect you over the next 6 months? So when we do this again 6 months down, we can learn some lessons from you. But you're running 55 different organizations that are very, very different in nature. What's that been like for you in the first run here?
It's really having to understand what the priority is, and the priority is safety, and so making sure that Denver Police, Denver Fire, and our transportation. Actually, it's a Department of Transportation Infrastructure. So they have transportation as well as like water treatment and some infrastructure things like that. Those are the most critical. Those things have to stay up and running no matter what. And so I've been working with those organizations on, what is your disaster recovery plan look like? If we had ransomware, what does your manual processes look like? Are you able to go to a manual process?
That's amazing. When you say it, I feel like, oh yeah, duh, emergency services, right? But I don't think there's a lot of duh to this at all. I think you have to go in and understand what each one's priorities are. Otherwise, and then you have to prioritize that community of prioritizations.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating. I started my career in technology, and of course, being in security, of course, we also have an interest in technology, of course, and just the different technology that it takes to run a city and county of this size. So Denver's over 700,000 residents, and it's just amazing. Like every police car has a router in it. Every fire truck has a router in it. So they connect back to the main network. It's so fascinating. Excuse me. When I started, I asked my SecOps manager, I'm like, what do we have for OT? And he just started rattling off stuff. It's like, well, the golf courses for the watering systems, and the fire stations have this device that tells them if the garage door is up or down. And it's like there's so much, and it's so fascinating from a technology standpoint what goes into making things work.
Amazing.
All right.
Amazing.
Well, we got to wrap up somewhere, and that seems like a good spot. Merlin, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your time. I wish you a great next several months, and if you don't mind, I'd love to check back in with you end of the summer here, see how things are going, see what you've discovered, see what you've uncovered. And see how much we've covered.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate being on the show.
All right, you guys. Hey, thanks for joining me. Merlin, thank you so much for being a guest, folks. Thank you so much for listening. This has been another episode of the Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Thanks for listening. Oh, do connect us out on LinkedIn. You can watch this and other videos on YouTube. And if you're still listening, subscribe, like, do all the things the kids tell you to do. And if nothing else, we see you guys another time, another place on yet another Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast.